Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to you all from wherever in the world that you're joining us or are watching this recording. Welcome to this public discussion session on the IIS application paper on fair treatment of a wide range of consumers. I'm Lauren Eckerman, a Senior Policy Advisor with the IIS Secretariat, and it's my pleasure to guide you through today's session. First, a quick message about the webinar recording. So we are recording this webinar and we will share it later on our IAIS YouTube and public webpage for viewing, but not for download. So webinar participants who choose to share their image and their audio, which relevantly your opportunity is during the Q&A component, that will be captured within our recording. Participants can look at our privacy notice, which is available on our website, and a link shared in the chat box for more information on how we process and retain personal information. So let's begin. Our goals today are threefold. First, we'll provide some background and context so you can see how this paper fits within the IIS's mission and strategic themes. Secondly, we'll walk you through the application paper, which we published in early July, covering what it says, why it matters, and how consultation feedback shaped it. And then third, we'll answer your questions and invite a constructive exchange of perspectives on the topic. So I'm going to give that brief introductory context and background. The IAIS is the global standard setting body for insurance supervision. We have insurance supervisor members from more than 200 jurisdictions around the world, which represents a very comprehensive coverage of the global insurance market. And the work of the IIS can be summarized in 4 core objectives. You see those on the slide in the yellow circle. So we, number 1, monitor and respond to key risks and trends. Number 2, set and maintain globally recognized standards for insurance supervision. Number 3, support our members on supervisory practices and facilitate capacity building so that the standards are implemented effectively. And number 4, we carry out assessment activities to check for consistent implementation of those global standards. And indeed, those activities are a cycle and they reinforce one another. The key point to draw out is that we don't just set principles and standards, that we also produce supporting material that helps supervisors to put them into practice in a proportionate way. And that's how you can understand the purpose of the application paper that we're here to discuss today. The IIS mission is set out here on the screen, and it really rests on promoting effective and globally consistent supervision in order to ensure policyholder protection and global financial stability. So this, I would say, you can regard as our perpetual mission. It's the core of our why. And then with each 5-year strategic planning period, we articulate a set of strategic themes that we see as cross-cutting and warranting heightened global attention and action. For the period this year, 2025 until 2029, they are number 1, strengthening supervisory response to climate change. 2, adapting to increasing digital innovation and cyber risks. And 3, supporting insurance to serve its societal purpose of building resilience. Today's paper is a concrete expression of the IIS mission. It's about making sure that insurance markets are fair, that they are there and that they are working appropriately to provide benefits and protection of policyholders that spans everyone, not only those who fit a more mainstream or average or normative type of profile. And the work links directly to strategic theme 3, supporting insurance's fundamental purpose of building societal resilience. By meeting the needs of a wide range of consumers, insurers can help close protection gaps. That is, situations where people should be covered but aren't, and then ultimately that is making societies more resilient. I already mentioned the IIS's role in setting standards. those standards are the Insurance Core Principles, or ICPs. That forms the globally accepted framework for insurance supervision. Application papers then are supporting material. An application paper, like the one we're discussing, itself doesn't create new requirements. Requirements exist in the ICPs. Instead, an application paper offers advice, illustrations, recommendations, examples of good practice, and it's all about supporting how to put the ICPs into practice. In the case of the paper we're discussing today, it's all about Insurance Core Principle 19 on conduct of business. And the proportionality principle applies to the content of application papers. And you're going to hear more explanation of that from the next speaker. The application paper on fair treatment of a wide range of consumers builds upon and complements other IIS work, such as the other application paper we published in July, which is on the supervision of artificial intelligence. Other already published related work includes an application paper last year on supervising diversity, equity, and inclusion from a governance, risk management, and culture perspective. Then before that, there was some precursor work conducted via industry engagement, via surveying supervisors, and by considering the work of other international organizations, which resulted in our 2022 paper, Stocktake on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Insurance Sector. And with ongoing relevance, there's the 2021 issues paper on insurer culture. The work we're talking about today also aligns with ongoing projects, including an update to our 2012 application paper on inclusive insurance markets. That work is in progress, and a new project that's really kicked off this year by the Market Conduct Working Group, focused on customers receiving fair value from insurance products. So against that general background and context, let's turn to the main topic, the application paper. And for this next part of the webinar, you will hear from two speakers, Mr. Rudy van Leuven, who is the chair of the IIS's Market Conduct Working Group and holds the role of Manager Insurance Supervision at the Dutch Authority for Financial Markets, and also from Ms. Swati Agarwal, who is an IIS member participating in the Market Conduct Working Group and who served as the project lead through this body of work. And her role is Head of Market Conduct Supervision for life and health insurance companies and managing general agencies at the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario, Canada. And I'll return later to moderate the Q&A section. So a quick heads up on that. At that time, we will invite questions to be asked live by the raise hand function. And then you'll have a chance to come off mute and ask your question live. Alternatively, you may prefer to type your question in the chat box. And indeed, if you like, you can already start doing that during this presentation across the next few slides, if you like. So with that, Rudy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lauren. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Before we get into the content, let's see how the 2024 public consultation shaped the final version. First, a big thank you to everyone who took the time to respond to last year's consultation. Your input was valuable in refining and clarifying the paper. We received 14 submissions from a mix of country industry associations, multinational industry associations, and consumer representatives. This slide sets out key themes from the feedback. Of course, per standard IIS practice, we've also published a comprehensive 130-page PDF with all the comments and the IIS responses to them. But first, let me speak about some key themes in a summary fashion. First, support for the work. There were many statements from commenters expressing their shared belief in the importance of insurers being inclusive, meeting the needs of a wide range of consumers, and delivering fair treatment. Proportionality and local context. Emphasis from commenters on the relevance of proportionality led us to preserve it and indeed reinforce it in the paper. The paper makes clear that the recommendations can be adapted to each jurisdiction's legal framework, market conditions, cultural factors, and consumer needs. We also added emphasis on respecting relevant laws, existing standards, and cultural factors. Recognition of insurers' autonomy. Several respondents value the paper's acknowledgement that insurers retain autonomy in their business models, operations, and distribution channels. We have kept this principle intact while showing how autonomy can work hand in hand with fair treatment objectives. Scope and focus. Some respondents sought confirmation that the paper focuses on retail consumers. We have made this explicit in the final text. We also clarified language to avoid ambiguity. And now we talk about a wide range of consumers. Balancing consumer protection and operational realities. Respondents encouraged us to strike the right balance between achieving fair outcomes for a wide range of consumers and avoiding undue operational or regulatory burden. We reviewed their recommendations and made some refinements to maintain this balance, keeping recommendations clear and practical. Some were changed to are encouraged to instead of should. Clarity and precision of language. A number of comments pointed to areas needed greater precision. For example, in section 2 on risk-based pricing and in box 2 on examples of consumers at higher risk of unfair treatment. We've adjusted the wording for clarity, ensuring the examples are relevant and informative without being prescriptive. Across all these feedback themes, our approach has been to make the paper clear, maintain an appropriate balance, and allow adaptability in its implementation in a jurisdiction, while keeping the focus on achieving fair treatment for the full spectrum of consumers. In short, the public consultation confirmed the value of this work and improved it. For example, we also received some examples of good practices in the consultation submissions. Thank you to those who participated in the consultation and at the roundtables in Cape Town in December. Moving forward with these next slides, we will share with you the content of the paper. I've already said that proportionality and suitability to the local context were stressed as important during the consultation, and section 1.3 of the paper explains and reinforces this. Proportionality means tailoring implementation to a jurisdiction's legal structure, market conditions, and consumers, and adjusting supervisory intensity according to risk. Local circumstances matter, from legal frameworks to cultural norms and market maturity, in identifying consumer needs and determining what fair treatment looks like. The paper emphasizes that jurisdictional laws, privacy rules, and existing codes must be respected. It also acknowledges that some consumer profiles and what counts as mainstream will differ across countries. Here, I want to begin by emphasizing that in this paper, we use the term consumer quite deliberately. It means not only customers, existing policyholders, or people interacting with insurers in anticipation of becoming a policyholder soon, but also, additionally, it extends wider to include the entire spectrum of potential customers of insurance. To say it again, it's not only those people already in or with proximity to the insurance system, but also people who are currently uninsured, not interacting with the insurance sector, or who insurance may not have considered as potential customer groups to service. This broader lens demonstrates the importance of fairness and trust and confidence. It's not only about people the insurance sector already serves, but also society as a whole. The key concept in this paper is that consumer populations are not homogeneous. Some people, due to their characteristics, conditions, or circumstances, have needs that differ from the mainstream or average consumer profile. The paper identifies 4 main ways unfair treatment can arise. 1. Insurance doesn't meet the purpose needs, or poor after-sales servicing, lack of access to insurance, and intentional targeting of vulnerable consumers. The examples in the papers make it real, ranging, for instance, from women facing maternity exclusions in the past, minority communities paying higher car insurance because of postcode-based pricing, to low-income households excluded because of affordability barriers or due to irregular earning patterns. The paper also talks about vulnerability. Vulnerability here isn't a fixed label. Anyone can become vulnerable for a period of time due to life events like bereavement, job loss, or illness. Two important principles are preserved in this paper: risk-based pricing and insurers' autonomy to define their scope of business. By insurer autonomy, we mean the fact that no single insurance company is expected to have to insure everyone, as insurers have the autonomy to decide their product range, target market according to the business model, risk appetite, and market considerations. Though at the same time, the paper expresses the idea of a collective social license for the insurance sector as a whole, meaning a societal expectation that the insurance industry collectively should serve society's broad range of needs, and only by doing that is the industry well fulfilling its core purpose. The paper shows that both risk-based pricing and insurer autonomy can be preserved, but applied in ways that promote accessibility and fairness. For example, use the latest medical and statistical insights instead of outdated assumptions, examine proxy measures like zip codes or age to ensure they're not embedding unfair bias, and consider instead opportunities for more accurate and fair measuring of the individual's risk. Monitor technology to prevent algorithmic discrimination, use data and research to see who you're serving and who you're missing, expand product ranges or modify exclusions, and improve accessibility for customers already in your pool, for example, through language options or inclusive forms. It even discusses forward-looking measures like the right to be forgotten, where after a certain time insurers agree to disregard past medical conditions when setting premiums. This shows that fairness could even look like going beyond strict actual tradition, a tangible example of balancing commercial and societal goals. Let me now pass to Swati to continue presenting the paper. Swati, over to you.
Thank you so much, Rudy. We are now on to slide 13, and we'll spend a bit more time on this slide because it's really the heart of the paper. Chapter 4, where we will talk about the principles of ICP 19 that actually aim at treating customers fairly throughout the insurance product life cycle and turn them into practical steps for implementation. Today, we will be talking about how the paper focuses on 3 ICP 19 principles. ICP 19.1, which is acting with due skill, care, and diligence. ICP 19.2, which is establishing and implementing policies and processes on fair treatment. And ICP 19.5, which states that the insurers, supervisors in the industry have to take into account the interests of different types of consumers when developing and distributing insurance products. Now, these aren't new requirements, but the paper offers concrete guidance on how to apply them so that fairness is real for all kinds of consumers and not just the consumers who are classified as mainstream, normative, or dominant consumer types. The recommendations that are contained within the paper are categorized into 4 different areas. So let's walk through each one of these as you see them in the graphic. The first one, right in the center of the graphic, is embedding it in the business culture. Now, this is the first category, and this is where tone from the top really matters. Boards and senior management, they need to actively prioritize fair treatment for a wide range of consumers. not just talk about it, but show it through their decisions, their messaging, and resource allocation. The paper points out that it's important to have a policy framework that explicitly addresses different consumer needs backed up by the right controls, reporting, and monitoring. It is about having a strong compliance and risk function that is just not a checkmark exercise, but helps address unfair treatment. It also means having a feedback and a remediation culture, an avenue where there is psychological safety for staff to address issues by encouraging open feedback. And finally, it also means having all staff provided training and awareness such that they can reduce unconscious bias and increase cultural sensitivity. Even small changes in awareness can make a big difference in how consumers experience a product. So that was category 1. Category 2 is where we actually start with our product life cycle, and that starts with product design. This is about anticipating the differences that exist within your target market. Now, ICP 19.5 states that insurers must take into account the interests of different types of consumers when developing and distributing insurance product. That means asking, who is in our target group? Are they all getting fair value from what we are designing? Are there certain consumers who should not be a part of the target group? Is it because the product's too complex or the claims threshold is too high? These are the questions that we need to think about when we think about product design. The paper also recommends that it's a good practice to test products with panels that reflect the diversity of the real consumer base and to adapt distribution methods for a wide range of consumers. The paper also calls out risks that are associated with evolving technology. For example, when relying on complex algorithms, are particular consumer cohorts getting disadvantaged without a sound risk-based justification? So that's category 2. Moving on to category 3 of the product life cycle, it's the second stage of the product life cycle, sales and distribution. In sales and distribution, the paper identifies that one of the key aspects is to meet the needs of different consumer types and avoid inappropriate sales. This means making sure that the marketing materials and the disclosures are accessible in plain language, available in different formats, and provided in a way that the consumers can realistically absorb and use. The paper warns against assuming that a customer has understood just because information was technically provided. If you know a customer has a vision impairment or limited digital access or cognitive challenges, you need to adapt how you communicate and advise, and that advice, as per ICP 19.8, should be reflective of customers' actual circumstances. Lastly, talking about after-sales services, product monitoring and review, the fourth category. Now, in this category, the paper alludes that fair treatment just doesn't stop when the policy is sold, but it continues through claims handling, complaints resolution, renewals, and policy changes. The paper contains very good examples on how claims and complaints processes should be easy to navigate and should be accessible for all consumer types, and how product reviews should look at whether certain consumer segments are perhaps getting disproportionately high claim denials or lodging more complaints? And if that's happening, what's the reason behind it? Ultimately, the aim here is to create a feedback loop, a loop where customers' service experience and their overall experience to the product lifecycle then informs the product design and distribution improvements. So that is what the core of the paper gets to in terms of providing practical recommendations through each of the 4 categories, be it culture, design, sales and distribution, and after-sales servicing. With that, Lauren, can we please move on to the next slide? So moving on to the slide number 14. When we were doing our work, we understood that access to insurance is a concern in many jurisdictions across the globe. And we thought that yes, we all as supervisors can create a conducive environment to facilitate financial inclusion and can have a role in shaping the environment and facilitating market development for a wide range of consumers. As you can see from the slide, that can include a variety of different aspects, right from designing targeted solutions to steering public consultations and using that feedback, to collecting data to monitor access, affordability, trends, to enabling innovation, to supporting alternative distribution channels, collaborating with a variety of industry and consumer groups, and of course, encouraging consumer education. Through these actions, supervisors are not just overseeing what the insurers and intermediaries are doing, but they step into a much more proactive and impactful role. They can set up controlled spaces, regulatory sandboxes to test inclusive products, work with NGOs and community finance groups to extend reach, gather data, and to really understand who's being left behind. It's all about shaping a market that's both stable and genuinely inclusive. With that, we've covered the main contents of the paper, but to wrap up, there are 4 key messages that I would like to leave all of you with. 1. This paper is about an implementation of ICP 19 that strives to ensure that insurance works for everyone. 2. The paper balances fairness with insurer autonomy and proportionality. 3. It provides practical recommendations across culture, product design, sales, and servicing. And last but not the least, 4, it recognizes the role of supervisors in fostering inclusion. The goal of this work is for the insurance sector to be accessible, fair, and responsive to the needs of a wide range of consumers. This not only benefits individuals, but also enhances societal resilience. Thank you again for all of those who've contributed during the consultation process. With that, let's move on to the question and answer session. I look forward to your insights and I'll pass the floor back to Lauren.
Thank you, Swati and Rudy. So we've arrived at the 3rd component of the webinar, and we're happy to invite your questions now. And to participate in responding to those questions, we are now also joined by Hannah van Voorden, who is the Head of Supervisory Practices and of Operations with the IIS Secretariat. So I see already some questions coming through in the chat box. That's wonderful, and we'll begin with those. Just a reminder too that in case any attendees wish to raise their virtual hand, then we're happy to take you off mute and invite you to ask your question live. Do just wait a moment or so as we are doing that process, and then we invite you to ask your question, because it can take us a minute to click all the different buttons. But as I said, we have a number of questions in the chat already, and I'm going to try to help direct those questions to our panelists. But panelists also, if you've got something extra to say on a question, please jump in. I see a question that asks, what is the guidance for supervisors when an insurer's business model consistently produces consumer harm? Is there some point when a supervisor seeks to remove the insurer's discretion on its business model? I think this question was posed when, Rudy, you were presenting about the section of the paper that talks about insurers' autonomy to decide the scope of business, and the paper preserving that, but setting out guidance for how it can be made consistent with overall fair outcomes and overall more servicing of a wide range of consumers. So Rudy, what about guidance for if a supervisor is consistently producing consumer harm?
Thank you for the question. I translate consumer harm into not delivering what consumers expect or even breaching law. And that's part of our almost normal day-to-day supervisionally work, where we monitor the market, look into things that happen, if we see that an insurance company or an intermediary has done something that's not according to law, we act. And it can be in a subtle way, and it can end up with penalties. So I consider this as a normal aspect of our day-to-day supervisory work.
Thanks, Rudy. And so then the paper itself isn't prescriptive or doesn't elaborate on exactly how supervisors respond, because those actions will be guided by the regulatory powers and the legal frameworks in place within each supervisor's jurisdiction.
Correct.
Okay, another question. I see a question here. How can we strengthen or improve the product validation process for insurance by the internal entities of the insurer before and after its communication to the supervisor? So if I'm interpreting the question, I think it's talking about product design and how insurers within their own internal processes can get better at validating or determining if a product design is going to be suitable. And the question is also referring, I think, to the interaction that might happen between an insurer and a supervisor in jurisdictions where supervisors have a role to approve products before they go to market. Rudy first, and Swati, if you want to come in also from your perspective.
Sorry, but can you repeat the question, because my connection was gone, so I missed the question.
Sure. So the question is about how insurers internally can strengthen or improve their product validation process. So I understand it to be, how can insurers get better at verifying that they've got the right product design before they go ahead and launch a product? How can they improve their product design? And then the question also anticipates the idea that in some frameworks, in some jurisdictions, an insurer might also have to get approval from the supervisor about its product before it can launch its product to the market. So how can they improve how they communicate with the supervisor about the design of the product?
Yeah.
So the question, I'm inviting you, Rudy, and I'm inviting you, Swati.
I'll start and then I'll hand over to Swati, because within my jurisdiction where I work, companies aren't obliged to hand in their products and the product design before entering the market. It's their responsibility and we look at it afterwards. But one of the key elements there is, if you design a product, you have a target market in which there are customers with needs or wishes, and you have to be sure that you meet those needs and wishes. So it could be through panelists or whatever to experience what what meets the wishes best and then enter the market. But as said, within my jurisdiction, they don't come up to us to present the products and then get an approval and then enter the market. So I haven't got any experience there. But maybe Swati.
That's a great question. And when we talk about strengthening the product validation process, of course, there are a lot of things that we do in different jurisdictions. But if we come back to the paper also has some very good elements on what we can do to strengthen the product design or improve the product validation process. For example, within the application paper, it talks about how we as supervisors can influence insurers to design clear criteria and establish, the right kind of policies and procedures that speak about the characteristics of the product, that, very well articulate, how complex the product is, the coverage, the eligibility, the claims threshold. So setting that right kind of, policy and procedural framework to begin with is something which is very important. And then the paper also gets into talking about, what are some of the good practices that we can have for supervisors to expect from the insurers, either by way of requirements or guidance, wherein the insurers can carry out specific qualitative product testing and scenario analysis to determine product suitability for different, consumer profiles, and then to be able to identify and mitigate possible risks for less common consumer types within a target group. So these are just some of the recommendations that are contained with the paper, which talk about the design aspect through the policy framework, as well as the implementation aspect through the testing, product review, and scenario analysis dimension. And I think once the insurers, supervisors, intermediaries, the industry starts following that, we definitely are going a step ahead in terms of strengthening the product validation process. So that would be my insights into it. Lauren, would you like to add anything?
Sorry, I think I've accidentally pressed the raise hand button. No, thanks, Swati. That's a great answer. Connected to the question just answered is another question I see in the chat box. And it asks, how can life insurers monitor and assess whether their products and sales practices truly ensure fair treatment across different consumer groups throughout the entire policy lifecycle? So I suppose the previous question, we answered it and it focused on product design, but this question invites specifically life insurers and throughout the product lifecycle, and it calls out sales practices in particular. And Swati, I invite you to answer that question first.
Great. Thank you so much, Lauren. That's a good question, but it's also a loaded question because there are multiple things that we can do, to address this particular aspect. And the paper, I allude to the paper because, as I said, all of us in our different jurisdictions follow different practices. But the paper has certain concepts that can help, with your question. The first thing is, in the paper, it also talks about the fact that when, for example, you're looking at complaints data can also be analyzed in a disaggregated way so that, we as supervisors can see whether certain consumer groups are getting good or worse outcomes. When it comes to sales and distribution, a lot of emphasis is also placed on the effectiveness of the marketing materials. How good the marketing materials are, or is it just a tick mark approach? So it also gets into, customer satisfaction surveys, like going back and reviewing whether the intent with which the product was sold, are they actually being met or not? So I think the combination of closely looking into your complaints from an aggregated and disaggregated viewpoint, looking into the claims experience, analyzing all of the data, continuously evaluating, are your marketing materials fit for purpose, as well as customer satisfaction surveys, should give you a fairly good idea of whether the intent with which the products are being sold is the way the products are actually functioning in the marketplace. There are more examples that I can add, but these are just some of the examples that can again help you get a good idea of where your product stands with what the purpose was from a design perspective after the sale is being made. I'll take a pause here to see if my co-panelists would like to add anything.
I think it's a very complete answer. And one thing I might add is if you look at complaints data, you might also get people going, an insight into people going through live events. And live events might trigger one of the elements asked here or mentioned here over the life cycle of a product. So that might help even more if you really analyze the complaints data or other insights you get from customers.
Okay, let me give you the next question. What I'm going to do here is take two questions from two different people that I see a common thread. So we've been asked, to what extent does implementing the elements of this paper only cost money and time to the insurance sector? Or are there also commercial opportunities from the insurance sector from this? And if so, what are these in your opinion? And the related question is expressed as a major concern is the cost of compliance, because affordability is a key concern for insurers and consumers. Do you have examples of cost beneficial application of the paper? So to respond to the questions about the balance of cost and the opportunities to be unlocked by implementing the recommendations of the paper, I'll pass first to Rudy. Thank
you. It's a good question and something we were looking at as well when we were writing the paper. A strong belief from a conduct perspective is that fair treatment of customers will benefit not only the customers, but the insurance sector as a whole as well. Because if you don't treat customers fairly, you end up with lots of complaints or people not being satisfied, etc. And in my jurisdiction, we saw a huge impact on the life market where products didn't deliver what customers expected of them, and it ended up almost finishing the individual life market. So if you look at the paper and you say treating customers fairly, then by doing that, you get happy customers, and happy customers are staying with you until the end of a product. If you look at the wide range of customers, they're all kind of groups that don't fit the normative mainstream customer profile that have needs as well. So you can, from a business perspective, focus on those and treat them with all their needs. Because if you can capture those customer groups, you can make a business model around it and earn money and treat those customers fairly as well. So I think it goes hand in hand and not two opposite ideas. Swati.
Thank you, Rudy. As Rudy mentioned, we had umpteen number of discussions on this particular topic. And, I agree with Rudy that in the long run, it makes the insurer's business more rounded, more sustainable. You do win clients, for a long time. And again, the paper is not preventing risk-based pricing or is not taking away insurer autonomy. So that balance can be achieved. And a lot of these elements which are contained in the paper, if anyone were to read it, you'll realize that FTC is not at a point in time. It continues through the product life cycle. And ultimately, all of the recommendations that are contained within the paper, they will enhance the consumer experience. And to me, I feel that if a consumer experience is enhanced, ultimately it does create a lot of tangible and intangible benefits for the insurers that are in this space. So that's my view on it. Lauren, anything that you would like to add?
Yes, I would just add that there are plenty of recommendations and suggestions within the paper that are just refinements to things that already happen. You know, think about it a little bit more broadly, do it a little bit differently, and you stand to gain a lot. For example, that product design and market research processes, which would already be happening, you know, check that you're reaching a wide span of a consumer population if you're composing a panel or you're surveying. You know, just have a check and have an intentional objective to make sure that you're not only asking and engaging with a particular type of the market, but doing it more broadly. And a second point is, I think that many of the recommendations are facilitated by a lot of rapidly evolving technology. You know, there's suggestions for more inclusive forms, you know, that forms should allow for different names, non-typical family structures, and, you know, forms don't need to be printed papers with a set number of little boxes for people to write in anymore. Translating materials into different languages or into different formats can be done much more easily and cost effectively than it maybe could have been in the past. So I think a lot of opportunity to implement ideas from the paper without having to spend extra. Okay, let's take another question. I'd like to give an opportunity for one of the attendees who's raised their virtual hand to ask their question live, and then I'll come back to a few extra questions I see in the chat box. So we have Avita Nofal. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. I have taken you off mute. Please go ahead.
My question relates to fairness and equity. In many insurance frameworks, what we find is that claims may be declined where the driver of an insured vehicle is found to be unlicensed. And this could be even in cases where the policyholder actually acted in good faith. They conducted a visual inspection of what seemed to have been a valid driver's license. Now, this actually raises a question for me of fairness and practical expectations. What mechanisms should be realistically available to persons to be able to verify the authenticity of a driver's license before allowing a third party to drive their vehicle? And this goes to the fact that, you know, particularly in jurisdictions where there's a lack of access to official licensing databases, and these may be restricted because of various privacy laws or other limitations. Is there room for discretionary judgment, or, if I could say, the balancing of good faith and fairness in claims being rejected? Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for posing the question. So I take the question to be, you know, grounded in quite a specific application, you know, the scenario that you described for us. And I certainly invite the panelists to respond to that. But I might also suggest that the question might invite consideration of what we might expect, what supervisors might expect insurers to do as they, you know, accumulate data about how a product is performing, about the reasons why claims are being denied. And if insurers have a sort of building societal resilience objective of seeing the products that they offer to the market provide value to the people who are buying them, and deliver the protection that those people are looking for when they buy the product, how insurers might innovate or use that data to design new products or different products. So any panelist who might like to answer the more specific context with room for with the question being room for discretionary judgment and balancing good faith and fairness in claims handling in the context of driver's licenses that are fake, or the kind of broader question that I've served up also.
Shall I start putting you add things to my answer? I think it's a valid question and also a very difficult one, in a sense that how we look in my jurisdiction at things is, as an insurance company, you can do it to a certain level. You can do your investigations and then your resources end. And the question or the example put forward is, well, what if an insurance company can't access data and the only thing they have is what they see, and is that enough? And that's really per jurisdiction to decide. So I can't answer from a IS perspective to say, oh, there will be enough or not. That's really dependent on the jurisdiction, and also from a supervisor perspective on its own mandate. So the question posed to, if it was in my context, it would be up to civil law in order to answer the question if the insurance company has done enough to ascertain if the person with the driver's license has got a valid driver's license. But the first answer we always give as supervisor is, you have to do what's in your remit in order to be able to perform your business. The other thing you answered is about data and obtaining as much data as possible. And I think that might be one of the chat questions or as well. If there's data and within the jurisdiction you're able to get that data because you've got all kind of privacy laws, then yes, please use it. That way you make your product better. The only thing we as a supervisor always ask in the end is, the more personalized you make a product, the more chances there are that certain types of customers, and that might be the ones we talk about in the paper, will get left out because they're not normative. So at this point in time, as a supervisor, we're looking at those aspects in what's allowed, how far do you go? Because every time you go a bit further in personalizing a premium or whatever, you will benefit someone, you might hurt someone else. So that's why we're looking at the moment, but still early days to give a real answer, but certainly something we look at. Hopefully that answers a bit of the question. Swati.
Thanks, Rudy. I think a lot of the question does go back to jurisdictional specificities. We have certain jurisdictions where the rules and requirements around having automobile insurance are very stringent before you even get your car on the road. But for the question that is posed, if that's not the case within your specific jurisdiction, then I would say one thing which is very important, which both Lauren and Rudy have alluded to, is collecting the right kind of consumer data. Because once you have that data, to validate the assertions that are being made, then that can actually reveal the gap that has been identified for the wide range of consumers, that can help identify, any kind of trends and patterns, as you've alluded to, in financial inclusion and exclusion. And perhaps that can inform the actions to conduct a few more thematic reviews to actually identify the gap, and also to take the results of that and have broader discussions with policymakers on how to address these kind of, protection gaps that have been mentioned in the question. So that's a generic answer and a methodology that we would follow to try and address the issue.
Okay, another question that came in through the chat box a little bit earlier asks about supervisors looking at a more aggregate level and looking at total market outcomes as opposed to in respect of each individual consumer. And the question asks, well, what should supervisors do if risk-based pricing and market forces leads to creating or exacerbating protection gaps. Because, for example, all insurers are moving to avoid certain types of consumers or avoiding insuring certain incidents. So because that question is framed sort of the bigger picture level and it's about protection gaps, I think it's a great question to actually pass to Hannah to speak about the IIS's work on that topic a bit more generally.
Yes, thank you, Lauren, and thanks for the question as well. So I think this speaks really to the point that Lauren mentioned very early on in the presentation, when we mentioned the different objectives and the different mandates of the IIS mission and of supervisors as well, because this really is linked to supervisors or different supervisory authorities within one jurisdiction having to balance different objectives. So the objective of macroprudential financial stability issues, the objective of microprudential, so stability of individual insurers, and then market conduct and consumer protection outcomes. And sometimes, in some cases, it is true that maybe one particular decision by an insurance company or maybe a particular rule that is implemented by the regulator or the supervisor could be good for one of those three objectives, but might actually create negative consequences for one of these other objectives, right? So that's, I think, where the question really leads to at the heart. So in this case, actually, the IIS did quite a lot of work on that as well. So we have our own stream of work on protection gaps, which so far has focused more on protection gaps that are related to rising frequency and severity of NatCat or extreme weather events. And there we've actually published a few papers which do talk about this particular issue as well, and how do you balance that? So what the need for having risk-based pricing, because ultimately what you see as well is it's not just about profit making, it's about having a sustainable business, right? So I think the risks that are going to be covered by insurance companies, it has to be a sustainable business. It's not just about making profit, but it's also about not going bankrupt because you're taking on too much risk on your balance sheet, versus being able that as an insurance sector as a whole to provide your role in providing that resilience to consumers, to private businesses, even the government as well. So we do discuss that in quite a lot of detail in a number of other papers. So maybe in interest of time, I won't go into that detail, but I'll just post maybe a link in the chat function for that. But I'll leave it to that for now then. And I think the question was from Bernie, and I also see he raised his hand, so he may or may not have a follow-up question on that as well.
So I control unmuting Bernie, so he hasn't jumped in to respond to you because I haven't unmuted him. Bernie, I'm very sorry, we've got 1 minute left. We've taken some questions in the chat box from you. I hope you don't feel overlooked that we don't hear from you here. I would be very happy to connect with you offline. In the last minute and a half, I'm going to try and have some rapid fire answers to a couple of the questions in the chat box that we haven't answered, which does include another of yours, Bernie. So rapid fire, I'm going to do my best on behalf of the panel. There was a question from you, Bernie, about guidance for supervisors on identifying and addressing algorithmic discrimination. So there, it is somewhat touched on in this particular paper, but a much deeper source on this topic is our other application paper from July, the one on supervising artificial intelligence. So that's the resource to examine there. And of course, it remains an ongoing topic of interest to the IIS. Our FinTech Forum is doing a lot more work on this. So it's an evolving topic. Another question from the chat box is whether there'll be follow-on work and what future stakeholder opportunities to participate, for example, through roundtables. Rapid fire answer, the Market Conduct Working Group's new project, which looks at customer value, is the new project for the Market Conduct Working Group. It necessarily has connections to this topic. So what is fair value? Who can derive value from insurance? there are clear overlaps. So I think of it as a progression of work on this topic. We welcome stakeholder input. We regularly hold roundtables at our annual conference event, which will this year be in November in Tirana, Albania. We have in the past, and we probably will again, convene a virtual engagement with stakeholders as an input to the work also. And with that, thank you to everybody who's joined us, who submitted their feedback in the consultation process and asked questions of us today. Please feel free to connect via email in case we haven't answered your question or you want to continue to discuss. We do have an ongoing program of engagement with consumer representatives with whom we've discussed this topic, and we look forward to continuing to do so. A reminder that you will find the recording, the paper, the resolution of consultation comments online on our public website. Thank you for joining us, and goodbye for now.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.